Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to your Tuesday edition of the Post Up with David Grubb right here on Boot Crew Media. I, of course, am David Grubb. Plenty to talk about today as we get closer and closer to the start of Summer League for the New Orleans Pelicans. We're going to start by talking about the Pelicans' latest front court addition, Kevon Looney. As you know, Looney signed with the New Orleans Pelicans after spending the last decade with the Golden State Warriors and winning 3 championship rings with Golden State. He signed a 2-year, $16 million deal with the Pelicans. But there's a key detail that was revealed earlier today, and that is that the team has a team option for the second year of Looney's contract. This is a good deal for New Orleans. It makes it even better for New Orleans in the sense that it gives the Pelicans a lot of flexibility. If things work out this season, if Looney contributes, it plays really well for the Pelicans, great. They've got him for a second year. If not, or if the Pelicans identify a better target for themselves as a center next season, at the end of this season, they can walk away. No long-term damage, nothing stuck on the books. And it seems like for Joe Dumars, 2 years, this season and next season, seems to be the benchmark for how long they want to go with these contracts. You know, you have Herb Jones this year and next year. You've got Jordan Poole this year and next year. You've got Kevon Looney this year and next year. Your rookies obviously are on longer deals, but you're allowing yourself the opportunity to make decisions and be flexible with the number of guys going into the final year of their contracts next year. Certainly that puts a financial burden on you to decide if they need extensions this year. But I think ultimately all of this comes down to the way the Pelicans ultimately perform on the court this season. Looney, of course, is not going to wow anybody as a scoring threat. He's a guy who does all of the little things as a big man, all elbows, all hustle in the post. He's going to set hard screens. He's going to fight through picks. He's going to fight for position. He's going to rebound on the offensive glass. And if you watched Golden State over these last 10 years, while Looney doesn't always pop off the screen and he's not the most noticeable player on the court, you will notice, if you're paying attention, how important he is to the running of that Warriors offense and their defense, especially in the playoffs. His value seems to go up when he got into the postseason. Offensively, what is he going to do? He's going to catch and he's going to finish. He can occasionally knock down the 15-foot jump shot in a pick and roll. He's not going to post up a lot, but you're not asking him to do so for the New Orleans Pelicans. He does have good hands. He does have a good touch around the basket. He's not going to miss if he's in close. That's not something you have to worry about. And if you let him just sit there, he can punish you and make the shots he's supposed to make. And that is an important baseline, again, for the New Orleans Pelicans, to have somebody at that level who is steady and consistent that you can count on a nightly basis. And I think that's what you get with Kevon Looney. Not going to give you 30 minutes, not going to give you 25 minutes, but for those 20 minutes that he's on the court, he's going to be effective at what it is that he does, and you're going to know exactly what you can and cannot do with him. He can pass the basketball as well. He has a high basketball IQ. Certainly you don't last with that Golden State Warriors franchise if you don't have a high basketball IQ, if you are not a good teammate, if you don't take instruction and are not coachable, you wouldn't make it with the Warriors. So Kevon Looney has demonstrated those things at 29 years old, and he also keeps the ball moving. When we talk about what Willie Green does have as foundational principles, you can always go back to 0.5 and that mentality that the ball has to move. Well, Kevon Looney certainly understands that. The Golden State Warriors are precise and consistent with their player movement in the half court, and he understands that. He understands spacing. There weren't 5 shooters on the court all the time when he was playing. Look, it'd be him, Draymond Green, Steph, Clay, and whomever at the 3 spot. That could be a non-shooter at times for the Warriors. But Kevon Looney understood that you got to keep moving, that you have to attack the offensive glass and give those shooters second chance opportunities when you can. And he understood how to play in that space. So on the defensive end, though, what you're getting from him is a guy who's not going to block a lot of shots, but he can protect the paint with his physicality. He knows how to perform on switches. He knows when to drop. He knows when to switch. Even though he's not a vertical defender, his positioning, his strength are going to allow him to be a little bit more imposing in the post than, say, an Yves Missi, who, from all reports, has gained some strength and muscle in the offseason. The other thing is that, of course, what this does for the Pelicans, it gives us some depth at the center position. They don't really have a ton of that with Yves Missi and Carlo Makovic being your only returning centers besides Kevon Looney. So he's the flexibility that he gives the Pelicans is either playing the backup role or occasionally starting if Missi is out of the lineup, or if you just want to go with a veteran presence at times, you can do that. You can match him up with certain bigs that you couldn't match Missi up with and try out things. He gives the Pelicans an option when it comes to putting a plug on the back end of their defense now, and he gives them an option for the future with this 1 year +1 deal, essentially, where the Pelicans, he's got an incentive to play well, and the Pelicans also can watch and be able to move out from this deal if it no longer works. Overall, you would say that this is a low risk, high reward or high character addition. And I know a lot of folks who are Pelicans fans don't really care if the Pelicans are signing good people right now. I'm not talking about off the court. I think what you're getting is high character on the court. You're getting somebody who's not going to be a problem on the court and somebody who does raise your floor. Does he ultimately raise your ceiling? That remains to be seen. But I think, again, when you have a quality baseline, when you have someone that you know is going to be a professional every day, who's going to show up to work and do what they're supposed to do, that is important, especially when they bring along a consistent skill set. And that's the one thing that Kevon Looney does. He is not elite as an overall player, but he does have some elite skills that are necessary to be a good teammate and to be a functioning member of what the New Orleans Pelicans are trying to build. All right, let's go on to another rumor that has started up, and it's about the Pelicans and their potential pursuit of Malcolm Brogdon. And let's talk about those rumors because, yes, the Pelicans are reportedly interested in the veteran guard. But I think that if the Pelicans make a move like this is one that they really might regret. And I'll say this. Look, all the good things about Malcolm Brogdon. Solid playmaker. He can take care of the basketball. He doesn't take bad shots. He's a consistent player over the years as far as what he does on the court. Solid court vision, knocks down open shots, and occasionally can create for others. He's shot it well from three for his career, almost 40%. So he's been efficient overall. Defensively, he's a willing defender, and he has some physical attributes that make him tough. He's a guy out of Virginia, so you know that that was a program at its peak that defended the ball like few others. He understands basketball, he communicates as a teammate, and he competes hard. So why would those be negatives for the Pelicans? And I'd say, how does he fit into what the Pelicans are trying to do now? The backcourt is already extremely crowded. When you talk about Jordan Poole, when you talk about the spot being held by DeJounte Murray, when you talk about Micah Peavy, the rookie, when you talk about Jose Alvarado, Jordan Hawkins, you have all these guards that you have. Jordan Poole, Herb Jones plays the guard spot. So you have all these players, and potentially even Trey Murphy could play the two depending on the lineups. If you've got all that, what are you going to do with Malcolm Brogdon? Where is he going to play? And let's not forget that the focus here is on making Zion Williamson better and finding out what this group is like. There can only be so much change. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can overhaul a roster in an offseason. You can get rid of the dead weight. But when you're asking all these people to come in who have played significant roles somewhere else, and you're asking them to diminish themselves, which is what you'd be asking for Malcolm Brogdon, who, is used to being either a starter or sixth man in this league. He wouldn't be that for the New Orleans Pelicans, or he shouldn't be, based on the players that you've already put around you, including Jeremiah Fears as well, who I forgot in the guard rotation. So it feels like to me that another guard is unnecessary at this stage, especially already. Look, minutes, touches are going to be tight. Where are those shots going to come from? Because you have three volume scorers in Zion Williamson, Trey Murphy, and Jordan Poole already. You're going to have guys that you have to get shots for, like Derek Queen, like Jeremiah Fears, like Jordan Hawkins, you have to get Sadiq Bey's shots. You have to get all those shots. So where would those shots come from for Malcolm Brogdon? And the other part you got to talk about is a team that's been snake bit by injuries. Malcolm Brogdon is not a player that you want to invest in. He's a guy who has missed significant time over the years on the court due to injuries, and it's been a number of issues. It's not just been one thing to manage. It's been multiple injuries over the course of his career, which have limited his time on the court. If you're the New Orleans Pelicans, is that the smartest use of your resources to bring in another player who's going to struggle with his health. The Pelicans have enough injury concerns already. They have enough problems with players missing games. So why would it be good to add another veteran who has durability questions to add to that problem? It just doesn't make sense. And finally, if we're talking about cost, it's not likely that Malcolm Brogdon is going to come cheap. He made $22.5 million last year. How far is he willing to go backwards for, again, fewer minutes, fewer shots? Is New Orleans the right place for him? Even on a short-term deal, it could limit the Pelicans' flexibility this season. You've opened up these roster spots. You got rid of Antonio Reeves. You still need to address your front court and find some more length and defensive ability in the front court. Adding another guard doesn't help with that either. So, the Pelicans need to get taller. They need to get better defensively. And I think that if you're not adding either defense in the post or floor spacing from taller shooters, then I don't think Malcolm Brogdon adds enough to this team. It's clear that Joe Dumars is being aggressive this offseason, but you don't want to get into this thing where you're just chasing name brands, and rather than trying to build a team that is going to be able to compete and that complements the other pieces on the team, not just Zion Williamson, but everyone on this team has to complement the others, right? This has to be a unit that works well together. And I just think that while Malcolm Brogdon is a quality veteran player in the NBA, signing him for the Pelicans could be a major misstep for them. They do need to tighten up the roster. They don't need to complicate it with someone else competing at that level for minutes, because there is this fine line that they are walking between competing now and developing for the future. And I think you still have to give those players the opportunity, these young players that you brought in, the opportunity to grow with this team this season. You're not winning a championship. You're not winning a championship. So if you're not winning a championship, you're building for the future one way or another. You're either building for the immediate future because you feel like you're on the precipice of challenging for a championship, or you're rebuilding for the long-term future because you don't have enough pieces. The Pelicans have to find that out this season more than anything else. Are they building for the short term, or are they building for the long term? Yes, you've got to do a little bit of both at all times, but what is your overriding direction? And I think that's the thing for the Pelicans at this stage. The direction of a former New Orleans great is also up for debate these days. After 20 seasons in the NBA, Chris Paul says the upcoming season will be his last. Chris Paul's a 12-time All-Star, one of the greatest point guards in NBA history, 6-time assist champion, 6 times steals champion. But where does he make his final lap? And I think a lot of people are starting to get nostalgic and think about the possibility of Chris Paul coming back to New Orleans. To bring back the 11-time All-Star who raises the floor on every team he's been on. They have performed better. You look at what the New Orleans Hornets were before Chris Paul arrived, and what he was while they were here, and what they were after. You look at the Los Angeles Clippers before he arrived, while he was there, and what's happened since he's been gone. You take it to Houston, Oklahoma City, wherever he's been, San Antonio, wherever Chris Paul goes, Phoenix took them to the finals. Wherever he has been, he has elevated those franchises. And certainly the Pelicans, in the stage that they are in, can use more of those type of players. You can say, well, Grubb, you just said that not get Malcolm Brogdon, but potentially go after Chris Paul. Well, the price is going to be different, right? But let's start with the things that make this obvious. First is the nostalgia part of this. Chris Paul coming back to the city that drafted him, the franchise that he helped pull out of the post-Katrina malaise and into the most successful era, which, again, for the Pelicans is not particularly hard to have, but the most successful era in franchise history. This could put a bow and close the circle for Chris Paul. It would allow a fan base that's gone through a lot and has never really had a good ending with any of its franchise players, whether that's David West, Chris Paul, Anthony Davis, and potentially Zion Williamson. The Pelicans / Hornets have never ended a player's tenure on a high note. It's always been something bad that led to the end. It always some hostility between the organization and the player when the end came. Not between the player and the city necessarily, unless we're talking about the case of Anthony Davis. But if in most of these circumstances, the best player has usually been driven out by circumstance, and there's been a lot of hostility on the other end. Chris Paul still kept some of his connections to New Orleans off the court. He was involved in the community for a long time. And I think that matters. The city has always mattered to him. We've had him talk a number of times about, missing the city and not understanding why the kind of vitriol that has followed him at times when he's returned to New Orleans exists, because he didn't ask to leave New Orleans because he didn't like the city. He didn't ask to leave New Orleans because he had a problem with playing in New Orleans. What he had a problem with was a team with no owners that was getting rid of the players around him that made that team good. The team that had, decided it wasn't going to commit to David West, a team that had already tried to trade Tyson Chandler, who went on to win a Defensive Player of the Year and a ring with the Dallas Mavericks. So you look at these things and you say, well, what are the obstacles to bringing a Chris Paul back? Because on the court, you'd be getting that veteran leadership who could stabilize your locker room, bring these guys together. He can manage a game for you. He can hit shots, and he can teach someone like Jeremiah Fears the finer points of being an NBA point guard. If you can teach him how to run an offense the right way, how to be the leader, how to take control of the locker room, which I understand you could also say one of the drawbacks would be is Chris Paul's voice might become the biggest in the locker room. But certainly you see the impact too of adding him to a locker room that has Willie Green, and we know that Chris Paul and Willie Green have a good relationship. If somebody's going to have the ability to translate what Willie's trying to do, which seems to have failed in a number of ways, but translate what Willie's trying to do offensively through Chris and defensively, because though he's a lot slower these days, he's still an intelligent defender who understands how people need to play in order to win. The other obstacle is Chris Paul has drawn interest from teams that are contenders. He may, at this stage, as a guy who's made one finals appearance, prioritize giving himself the best opportunity to chase a ring in his final season. And of course, the New Orleans Pelicans are not in the category of teams chasing a ring. Second, again, as we talked about with Malcolm Brogdon, the Pelicans do have a lot of guards. So you're squeezing minutes for somebody and maybe not having Chris get the opportunity that he wants in his final season to really go out the way he chooses. Or for one of these other young players, it could cost them minutes. Finally, does Chris Paul fit Joe Dumars' long-term vision? I think in some ways, again, he does, but I get the fact that this team is built around short-term contracts for veterans and a little bit longer for these younger players to see if they develop. Chris, in and out over the course of 1 year, being around for just one season, you could say maybe that's not in the best long-term interest of the Pelicans, but I think a short-term gain is definitely on the table if you did it. You're not bringing him in to win a championship. You're not bringing him in for to even be a major contender. But what you're bringing him in is for his legacy to be, salvaged. Not by salvaged is the wrong word. His legacy to be properly honored. That's what I would say in New Orleans. It'll be about mentorship for these younger players, and it would be the first time that we finally got to give a player a proper goodbye. I know the Bensons do not like to retire jerseys, but Chris Paul's jersey ultimately should be retired by this franchise. And this would be a big step in towards doing this. If you ever want to have a culture that honors the brief history that you do have, I think it has to start with guys like David West and Chris Paul and unifying the fan base and energizing your team again, even if it just works out for one season. The clock is absolutely ticking on Chris Paul's career. The window to make this happen is very tight. So the question for the Pelicans becomes very simple. Do you want to be in the final chapter of Chris Paul's story, or do you want to write the final chapter of Chris Paul's story? That will be the test of the motivation. I still say it's a long shot, but I think it's one of those ones that certainly would be a somewhat of a fairy tale ending for the city of New Orleans and its relationship with its best player of all time. And I know some people argue it's AD or some will argue someone else, but I would still say based on just the culture, the winning, and his overall performance, I think people need to look back again and how good he was as a young player in New Orleans. I still think Chris Paul is the most successful and had the best career of any New Orleans basketball player so far. ESPN has sorted all of the 15 Western Conference teams into 5 tiers. The Pelicans fell into the bottom tier, tier 5, affectionately titled, "What's the Plan?" So for the Pelicans, this is what the synopsis is, basically what ESPN said about this team. One suspects that the Pelicans would place themselves in a different tier given the aggression with which they approach their offseason moves. So I think that that's accurate, that Pelicans fans in general are very excited about the moves that the franchise has made, regardless of what happened with the draft day trade of those picks, of the pick to move up 10 spots to get Derek Queen. Fans don't care about that. They're not worried about next year. What fans are worried about is the product on the court this year, and they are happy by and large about what they've seen. So I would agree with that. They also say the Pelicans have signs for hope that if they can get better health from Zion, Trey, and Herb, who played a total of 103 games as a threesome last season. But there are changes. Obviously, the roster is in flux. There is this dynamic of pulling between the short-term games versus the long-term future. And the Pelicans were just 10-20 when Zion played last season. So you wonder if this roster is constructed to make him his best. Certainly, I would say that 10-20 was heavily influenced by the players around him, but certainly the Pelicans also were underperformers, even with the injuries that they had. I think that they were worse than anybody anticipated that they were going to be, even considering the injuries that they had. They were an underperforming team. So for this season, they've got to be much better. But to be in that bottom tier, I don't necessarily agree with it, though. You also have to look at DraftKings and them stating that they think the Pelicans, they're putting the over-under on their wins this season at 31.5. I would say that's low. I think what Vegas is covering for at this stage is the lack of certainty when it comes to injuries and how many players on this team have missed time. My original guess, and I will stick to that for the time being, is that the Pelicans will win somewhere between 36 and 42 games. I think that's reasonable. 42 would be a 21-win increase, which would match what the Memphis Grizzlies did after their year that was injury-plagued. Last year, they bounced back by improving by 21 wins after their injury-plagued season. So I think that's the high end for the Pelicans. You had 21-21, you're getting 42 wins. That puts you 2 games over 500. That should put you firmly in the hunt for the play-in. Last season, the last play-in team was below 500, the Dallas Mavericks. So if you get to 42 wins as the Pelicans, if you get to 40 wins, you should be in that conversation for 8, 9, 10. And I think that's reasonable when you look at the teams in the West and which ones you would consider just by today, which ones are playoff locks. And I think you're going to say either 6 or 7 of those teams in the West would be considered playoff locks, putting the Pelicans in that group from 8 to 13, 18, 8 to 14. I don't think that they're the worst team in the West by far. I don't think that they are, but I think that the Pelicans are in a big mess of teams all trying to figure themselves out. It's going to depend on how quickly they do that, how quickly they can get up and running. And again, you can go back and check this out, but the first 10 games of the season will be very important. The Pelicans have made the playoffs one time in their history when they started below 500 after those first 10 games, and that was the 36 and 46 season where they fought their way out of the play-in and into the playoffs. So it's not something that's common. The Pelicans are going to have to get up to speed quickly, and they're going to have to be healthy if they want to prove these folks wrong. And my thing to them would be, don't worry about proving anybody wrong. The record will be what the record will be. The point right now is to get a cohesive basketball philosophy to make sure that these guys are healthy for day one. And hopefully that starts with a successful run at Summer League, which starts on Thursday. We will be here live on Thursday evening to talk about Summer League and to start our coverage of that. But of course, earlier on Thursday, you'll get your final episode of the post up for the week. So check that out as well as the live show, and make sure you hit the like button, the subscribe button, the share button, and that notification bell so you never miss anything that we've got going on here on Boot Crew Media. Until the next time, you can keep up with me on social media at DM Grubb on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, on Blue Sky, and on TikTok. You find me on all those places. So just keep up with me there. You can also check out the Bird Rights. Got to put up some new stuff. I haven't put anything up in about a week, so I'll have to get on some new stuff and write some things there, especially once Summer League gets started. I'll be back to writing pretty regularly throughout the rest of the off season. But thank you again for tuning in. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your suggestions. And this has been the Post Up with David Grubb on Boo Crew Media. Y'all have a great one.